This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, the slaughter, China's organ harvesting. With us this evening, Ethan Gutmann, an award-winning China analyst and human rights investigator. He's the author of The Slaughter, Mass Killings, Organ Harvesting, and China's Secret Solution to its Dissident Problem. He has also been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Ethan, what an honor to have you on the Glazov Gang.
Well, the honor's all mine.
Thank you, Ethan, very much. I've been doing my homework on this issue the last couple days very intensely. And of course, over the years, I've been doing my homework on this. It's hard to know where to start, Ethan. There's somewhere where it's very close to my heart because my parents are from the Soviet Union. They were dissidents. I grew up educating myself, listening to the family's discussion of the dissidents at our table, reading a lot, and what my father was telling me just about the Stalinist purges, about the tortures in the Soviet Union under the KGB, etc., and everything else that we studied about Castro's regime and Mao's Cultural Revolution, etc., Cambodia, the killing fields with Pol Pot, so much evil that Marxism perpetrates throughout the world. And now we've got this monstrosity, this Communist Party in China, and you're unveiling and revealing things that, I've talked to some people recently just that you're coming on my show, and I tell them the topic. Nobody knows anything about this. It's never in the media. It's hardly ever in the media. But anyway, let me get off my little tirade here. That's my little introduction. It's so good to have you on. Look, why don't we just start with this? Ethan, how did you come to this monstrous issue?
It was kind of an accident, which is the way a good investigation should start to some extent, because I had no preconceived notions on this. Basically, I felt that the books, I lived in China for a while as a businessman in Beijing, and about 3 years. And I knew that the number one issue back then was Falun Gong, really, in China. I wouldn't say it is now, but it was then. And it was very clearly an obsession of the Chinese Communist Party to get rid of this group. I didn't have strong feelings about the group. I didn't really have strong feelings about the Chinese Communist Party, but I did notice one thing. The writing about this was terrible, okay? The books that were being written about Falun Gong were miserable. They were all sort of people taking pot shots at it as a religion, which I just thought this is inappropriate. It's like you have some special wisdom. You're so unique. And I don't feel that way. I felt that what needed to be done was a history of the conflict between Falun Gong and the Chinese state. This kind of misunderstood group, this very Chinese group, and the Chinese state. Along the way, I started doing a lot of interviews. That's the way I write. I go and I interview people, I do field research. And I like to get very close to them. I like to spend hours, 6 hours, 12 hours sometimes with a witness, trying to get their real story as best I can. Almost a therapeutic process. This one woman, she was a real salt of the earth. She'd just gotten out of a labor camp. Yeah, you're familiar with those, right, Jamie? And she'd just gotten out of a labor camp along with a couple of friends of hers. And she was a very country kind of woman, salt of the earth, a bit elderly, but not that elderly, very punchy. And at one point she mentioned, yeah, they gave me this physical exam, and then they did this other thing. And then I was just like, well, hang on, can we talk about this physical exam? And she described it, and it made no sense. So I kept asking her about it. I said, tell me every detail about this thing. And when I mean it made no sense, it was this. They took blood samples. They felt around for her kidneys and liver. They sort of pushed and prodded. They did a urine test, and they did an EKG. and nothing else. Okay, there was one other thing. They looked at her eyes for a long time. Okay, and they just shine a light in her eyes, and they're very carefully examining her eyes. But they didn't do a focus test. They had no peripheral vision. Nothing involving actual eyesight. Just the clarity of the tissues of the eye. And I said, there's something, I didn't say this to her, but I was like, there's something wrong here. And meanwhile, she was getting so irritated with me, Jamie, because she was like, I'm telling you about torture. I'm telling you about my spiritual development and these guards and this terrible situation. And all you want to talk about is some stupid medical examination. And that's when I knew maybe I had something here, because there was no way this woman was trying to fool with me. There was no way she was presenting something. She did not know about the organ harvesting. She didn't know that people had been selected. Now, I'd heard about that, but I rarely run into somebody who was obviously being selected, or they were considering selecting her, and had no agenda, none whatsoever. And that was the point where I started going, maybe there's something here. Now, that's a very minor interview. That's a very minor piece of evidence. There's huge other pieces of evidence, like the fact that you can go to China and get an organ in 2 weeks. Sometimes you can get an organ in 4 hours if you have an acute liver crisis. And the only way to do that is if you have a stable of tissue types. So you can select the person very quickly, right? And they're waiting to be harvested. It's also true that we know from the medical literature, their favorite age is to age 28. And they usually write it down as 28 died of heart failure. Well, Jamie, how many people do you know who are 28 who've died of heart failure?
Nobody, except now with these vaccines against COVID. But Ethan, 1 second. Thank you so much. Let's just put this. We're going to put a couple pieces of the puzzle together here, but just for our audience, just in case you're a little bit confused, not really sure what we're talking about, let's just crystallize the picture here for a minute. Communist Party of China, what's going on over there? Thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people that are dissidents, opponents to the Communist Party. They might be the wrong ethnic group. The Communist Party of China is rounding these people up, operating on them while they're alive, taking out their livers, their kidneys, their eyes. They're doing this to children. They're doing this organ harvesting on human beings. And this is not hardly being talked about in the West, but this is the regime that's also, as we know, behind a lot of this evil stuff with what's going on in terms of COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So this is our subject. And Ethan Gutmann is investigating this all over the years and has been revealing and telling the truth about these horrifying things. So, Ethan, so they're targeting political dissidents. They're also targeting the Uyghurs, right?
In fact, when the research really started in earnest, one of the groups that I wanted to look at was the Uyghurs. And nobody had accused anyone of harvesting Uyghurs for their organs. But I was able to go back with the help of several very prominent Uyghur activists who had little bits of something they'd heard, a rumor here and there. And I was able to go out and investigate those rumors. And I did it mainly in Europe and Canada. These were all people who'd been inside a camp or had somehow gotten out of Xinjiang or East Turkestan, as the Uyghurs like to call it. And I started finding very clear evidence that, in fact, especially with one person who was a nurse. And when there was something called the Gulja massacre, which took place, it's not very famous, but it took place back in 1997. And it was just basically a demonstration that some Uyghurs had in a town called Gulja because they weren't allowed to celebrate Ramadan. So they went to the town hall. And the town hall, there were a lot of troops waiting there, and the troops shot a lot of people. After that, everything went to hell, including in this nurse in her hospital. They started I know this sounds incredible, but it is true that they started killing the Uyghurs have second children. They were allowed this privilege of having not just one child policy, but having two, because they're a very small ethnic group by Chinese standards. The second child would start getting killed. They were killing second children in the hospital. They were giving them certain drugs. Kids would turn blue, the kids would die. Well, that's bad enough. But then you get into this second thing, which is, she said, well, they started harvesting Uyghurs on a very small scale. Now, I was able to confirm this with another doctor who was Uyghur, who worked in Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang. And he was told by his superior, he said, go into the political prisoner wing of the prison, the main prison in Urumqi, and take the prisoners and take blood tests, take blood samples of them all. And he said, why should I do that? And he said, because he said, these are very bad people. These are very bad people. And you ask a little too many questions, but okay, they're very bad people. And we have some very important officials who come into Urumqi. And they're in this such and such hotel, and they're waiting for organs. And so he went in and he did this blood test. He nearly caused a riot. There was something about the Uyghur sensibility which understood there was something terribly wrong about what he was doing. And he kept insisting it's just for your health. And they were going, no, it isn't. How can you do this? You're a Uyghur like us. How can you do this to us? But he did it. And the 6 officials got their organs. And then a couple of months later, another 6 officials came in. These are all Chinese Communist Party officials. This is very low level stuff. These are minor numbers, okay? But they set, the precedent was set. And so in fact, when the Falun Gong became the mainstay of the whole thing, it became there were close to 2 million Falun Gong in Chinese prisons and black jails and mental hospitals and work camps. There were about 2 million incarcerated, and they were clearly using Falun Gong for the mainstay. The main organs were coming from Falun Gong. They're young and healthy. They don't drink, they don't smoke. They practice very healthy qigong exercises. But over time, that population got older. Over 15 years or so, that population got older, and they seemingly started running out of them. We have evidence of that too, because they started coming to Falun Gong homes and taking blood samples from these people and DNA cheek swabs. So that, in about 2015, it switches back to the Uyghurs. And this time it becomes huge in the Uyghur community. The Uyghurs sound like such a strange people, but they're really not. I mean, they're a Central Asian people. They fit right in with the Uzbeks and the Tajiks and the Kazakhs. I mean, they're just one of those brothers, okay, of those tribes, the nomadic tribes that were in that part of the earth. And they speak languages which are, kind of like English and Scottish. You can kind of understand each other. It might be a little difficult sometimes, but it's close enough. And the Uyghurs basically are being used as this is a way of destroying probably its most vital activist population, which is again about 28 years old. And at the same time, making a lot of money off them. And I really can't see any other way. I mean, look, there are many ways that the Uyghurs are being exploited. They're a population of maybe 15 million people, and that's tiny by Chinese standards. They're being used for forced labor. They're being used for many other purposes, but they're also being used for organ harvesting. And when people talk about genocide of the Uyghurs, they don't know it, but they're really talking about organ harvesting, because that is where the big numbers come in. And I say this as the only person in the world who can say this, because I've done the research in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
That it's about.
And Ethan, they after they're killed too, as you have discussed and written about, they don't even let the family see the bodies afterwards because they need to hide what was done to the body.
That's right. And in fact, after that Gulja incident I talked about way back in 1997, they started patrolling the main cemetery in Gulja. Nobody could enter, and nobody was allowed to see the bodies. There's an interesting story, which I'm going to put in my book. And now this is kind of a secondhand story, so I'm not going to say it's an absolute, but there's so many stories somewhat like it. This one's particularly vivid. It's a young man, and his father died in the camps, and he was buried in the Muslim style. Do you know anything about the Muslim style of burial? It's kind of like a
Not too much.
okay, there's sort of like a chimney almost that goes down into the earth, and then the body lies flat at the bottom, but you can go down that chimney. And he did. He went in after he wasn't allowed to look at the body at all, but he went in the middle of the night, broke into his father's own grave after the burial, and found that the body was encased in a kind of very thick plastic. He cut the plastic, and then under, with just the light of I guess a cell phone is what he had, with the light of the cell phone, he looked around at his father's dead body, and the organs had all been stripped. Other things were there. The stomach was there. I mean, he was very positive about this point. The stomach was there. All the parts you can't really, you don't need for anything. You can't sell them to another person. But yes, the corneas were gone, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys.
Ethan, these issues that you're dealing with, like one of the things that frustrates me about most people in general is their incapacity and reluctance to see with their eyes what goes on in this world and what evil forces do and plan to do. And so we know that many of the Jewish people during the 30s in Europe that were warning what the Nazis were going to do, that there were many of their Jewish brothers and sisters that were saying, oh, you're paranoid, we're at the peak of civilization now, this is not going to happen, don't be so pessimistic. And when we saw what Hitler perpetrated, what the Nazis perpetrated, when we see what Stalin perpetrated, when we see what you're describing right now, and so many people's reluctance to absorb this and to see it. And I want to take it a step further right now, and this is my view, and I'll just let you handle it in the way that you would like. But when we show this evidence right now of what the Communist Party is doing in China, and people are so shocked, oh, how could this be happening? This does not just happen in Cambodia. This does not just happen under Pol Pot or in China. You think Stalin is just in Russia. This evil is worldwide. It's coming here. And so what we see right now, when you talk about the swabbing of the cheek, you don't see that swab happening right now all across the United States and in the West? Where do those swabs come from? What are they being used for? They're pretending that they're testing the COVID. All this DNA testing that's been going on to find out about your ethnic background. In my view, this is being collected by nefarious forces, and it's going to be used against us, perhaps for organ harvesting, perhaps for other evil purposes. Do you think that it's 100% that I'm just a paranoid person, or may I be onto something perhaps?
You're paranoid, but you're onto something. Can I go that way? Because I think that's
Okay.
right. I think that's right. I don't think, look, we're mainly monitored in the West by advertising. I mean, this is, we're monitored because people can make money off that monitoring, and they're not thinking about harvesting our organs. But every one of these purposes can be turned like that to what I'm describing. And even then, let's get it straight. I'm not saying this is the biggest atrocity of all times. It doesn't even come close. Okay. 25 to 50,000 is what I think the Uyghurs are being harvested at, somewhere in there. Okay. That's not a huge number. You could do that in the camps in Germany without breaking a sweat. The camps in Germany plus Poland, in a couple of weeks you could kill 50,000 people. It was not a problem. So I'm not saying it's that. I'm not even saying I think by the time this will be solved, we're either going to be printing out organs or we're going to be using pig organs or whatever fairly soon. So I don't think people are really after our organs per se, although there's always components in human beings that are the equivalent of rare earths or rare metals, right? Special things that we have in us that can be used for usually very good purposes. I mean, organ harvesting is a fantastic. Organ transplantation saved so many lives. It's amazing. It's like a second life for a person. All right, so I just want to, put those caveats in there. Okay. But on the general level, yes, there's something very significant about this, and it's particularly the involvement of the doctors. And I really wish this is not something which I've gone into my writing, because I'm not really an activist. I'm more of a researcher. I'm more of a guy who digs things out and sort of says to the public, you make of this what you will. Here's the evidence that we have. But truthfully, this has been a disaster, not only for China, for China's medical system, because there are plenty of very young, bright doctors who I'm sure would like to be doing very ethical medicine. But it's been a disaster for their enablers in the West. I mean, we all know the World Health Organization. It's obvious to everybody the World Health Organization is in Chinese pockets these days. But, to this extent, they know that this is going on. And they don't want to bring attention to it. In fact, they want to sort of say, well, China can reform, but it can't reform under these conditions of press exposure and people calling them butchers or murderers or Nazis or something like that. And I would argue the opposite. I would say, no, the only thing that makes a country shift is embarrassment. And I was very interested to talk to you about that, because I don't know exactly what brought the Soviet Union down. Sure, I was a sentient being then. I was, I was a smart enough young guy, but I'm not really sure from the inside how much of it was a sense of embarrassment within Soviet society, Russian society, how much of it was a feeling that the life was passing them by. I don't know all the factors, but I do know this. China's future, if they want to make money, their future is in pharmaceuticals. It has nothing to do with this organ harvesting business, okay? This is a typical Communist Party, one of these crazy jags that they go off on, right? And then once they've done it, they've got to keep covering it up. And it becomes a self-perpetuating system. It also has money involved and all these different incentives, and they can never get rid of it. Meanwhile, the one place they could really make money is in pharmaceuticals, because they've got a huge population to test drugs on, and they could probably get away with getting drugs out very early, okay? And the fact is, that's the big money, not this. But China has blown it in this area. I mean, their COVID vaccine's terrible. It's 50% or less effective. If that, we don't even know anything about the side effects. And basically, within China, at least, there's a fairly large awareness that something is going on in the organ harvesting area. That something wrong is going on. And that's actually why they have a lot of trouble getting people to volunteer donate their organs in China, because people are aware there's huge money and there's corruption in this.
Ethan, let me interrupt for 1 second here. So again, I just want to stress often that when I'm saying stuff, I don't mean to be projecting onto you that we have the same views here. I'm just stating my view, and then I give it over to you. So you're mentioning money, absolutely, always financial stuff going on, money. Now, for me, as a Christian, I also see a spiritual battle always happening here. So when people would be asking, well, why did Stalin kill millions of people? And why did so for me, Satan hates human beings. He loves bloodshed. He hates life. And so when Stalin or Hitler or these communist dictators and regimes, when they're possessed by the devil, They love mass murder. They love abortion. They love all of this stuff. You know, so I see a spiritual component here in terms of sadism, in terms of just killing for killing's sake. And I definitely see that in this context here in China in terms of this issue, that there's just a sadism, also political repression, that this is also one of the weapons by which that they repress and suffocate dissent. And then there's, as you're saying, they're also making money. Is there something that I may have missed? Like the question has to be asked, why?
Well, those are the main components. You're right, but there's one other, well, two other really, but they're two sides of the same coin. Look, these things are always, with the case of Falun Gong, Falun Gong was seen as a real danger to the Chinese Communist Party. I know that sounds unbelievable because they're kind of like a Buddhist revival group and not much more than that in many ways. But the values that they were pushing, compassion, truth, and forbearance, were so opposite to the values that the new China is built around that clearly they felt they had to crush this group. And it was not just a question of, it really was not just a question of the fact that Falun Gong was very large and had about 100 million people at one point. The Uyghurs are not a big group. They're about, as I say, 15 million. Some Uyghurs will tell you 20 million. The Chinese claim they're 13 million. I call it 15 million. Fine. The point is this. What are the Uyghurs a gateway to? Well, they are a gateway to the Muslim religion for sure. Although they're not terrific Muslims in the same way that most Central Asians are not terribly strong Muslims. But racially, they're really different. They're a race, racially, they're not at all Chinese. They're really Caucasian. They're really Westerners underneath it all. And that's true of a lot of Central Asia as well. And so I think it's important to recognize that the racial element is here for China. It's very strong.
Let me interrupt for 1 second, Ethan. 1 second. And China now has the technological software. They just look at your face and they can tell what ethnicity you are, right?
That's right. I met the guy who actually made that software. He's a Uyghur. He's out in the world. I'm not going to say what country, but he gave me a very honest interview about what he did and how he did it. And of course, things have advanced quite a bit since he made that first program. But yes, it can do all that. It can absolutely do that. And it can do one other thing. Okay, right now, Jamie, you on your face, you have, there's blood moving across your face. And it's moving at a certain rate. A computer can see things that I can't see, that the naked eye can't see. It can pick up those patterns. It can actually tell how much stress you have at any given time. And so what you have now is a computer, really a camera that has a computer in it, which can look at your face and say, okay, that's Jamie, and this is his ethnicity, and he's worried, or he's very tense right now. And if those two things are, if you're a Uyghur and you're tense, that means the police stop you immediately. Just takes those two elements. Now this is true. This is something he really developed. Now the Chinese would have developed it without his help. Somebody else would have come along. I'm not questioning that. But the point is, one of the great tragedies of this, and Jamie, you know this as somebody who comes from the Soviet background, is everybody gets implicated, don't they? And this is one of the worst things about it. And so for him, I think for this guy, it was a confessional style interview. It was somewhat of a, I could tell he felt some relief talking about it. But this is where we're at. And you're right. This is the situation is one of wraparound surveillance. We've never seen anything quite like it. Unfortunately, that's bleeding into every Central Asian country now. If there's any area which I hope that we've affected things, it's in defeating Hikvision the Chinese company which makes the cameras. Those are the same cameras which are used in the concentration camps in Xinjiang. We were able to prove that. I recently brought a witness and his family back from a friend of mine got them out of Kyrgyzstan, and I brought them out of Turkey, and now they're in Northern Virginia, and they're going to be American citizens. And it's a wonderful story. It's a story of total deliverance. They're Christians, actually. And they're Kyrgyz Christians, and the father was in the camps. And one of the things he did, yeah. Yeah, one of the things the guy did, which impressed me, was the first time I interviewed him, he was terrified. He would not interview him. I finally said, look, I will turn off every device, and I just have this old tape recorder, a dictaphone. Okay, it's got batteries. That's it. It's a tape. I take the tape. That's it. Nobody can recognize your voice off this dictaphone. It's not good enough to get a good voice print. He finally said, okay, you can do that. And one of the things he told me was that he described how the cameras were everywhere in the camps. He was very specific about it. He knew where the one in the toilet was. It was over here. He knew where the one going down the hall was. How often every single camera, he'd memorized it. And I said, this is a guy I've got to get in front of Congress, okay? Because he's the one, he's the key to defeating, Hikvision is a very, they make terrific surveillance cameras. I'm not doubting their quality, but we absolutely can't have these in the United States or anywhere in the West. This is very, very dangerous. Now, again, with the cat and mouse game, Jamie, that somebody else is going to come along and make those cameras. Yes, I agree. This doesn't solve it, but sometimes we just have to win incremental battles here. Yeah.
Ethan, I remember watching that part of you discussing this in an interview that I was watching, and you had said that in these cases, these Uyghurs and Kazakhs that are in these camps, cameras are everywhere, there's no privacy. They haven't had a genuine conversation in years, There's not one place, even in a corner, where you can speak to somebody. It's very, very sobering.
Yeah, not even, and sometimes in the bathrooms, in the beginning, they didn't put the cameras in. And so for a minute there, one person would sit on the toilet, the other person would wash their hands, and you could have as long as you could sort of speak for a second. That's gone. They closed that loop too. Can you imagine that? The alienation of this is spectacular. That's something new, but.
Well, that's what they want. And that's what they want. And it's very much interconnected to the dots they're telling us to stand on the last 2 years, the distancing, et cetera, et cetera. But Ethan, I think a lot of people would prefer that we skip over the details, but I want to deal with it a little bit. Tell us about, I was watching one of your interviews. There's just this ambulance, and there's just this human being screaming, and everybody can hear it. He's having an organ taken out of his body, and these communist authorities are just operating on this person while he's alive with no anesthetic. This is the Communist Party for you. Tell us a little bit about this. Tell us one or two cases just of this horrifying evil that they perpetrate on humans in this context. How do they do this? Tell us about one or two horrifying cases.
Well, I would advise you, the person you want to talk to, although he hates to talk about it, he doesn't like to, is Enver Tohti, who was one of the very first major witnesses who was brought out in this process. Now, what happened was I was giving a speech of some kind at Westminster in London. And along the way, somebody commented, why don't you have more doctors coming out about this? And I sort of said, well, it's very difficult to get doctors to talk about this, especially in China. Their families could have consequences and so forth. And we got to the Q&A, and this guy actually, he sort of opened it up, and this guy stood up and said, I don't have a question. He said, in very broken English, he said, I did this with my own hands. And he explained very briefly then, but then I went back and interviewed him many times on this. And he explained how he was a surgeon and had been uh, forced really to go out and take a man apart who was still alive, who had been shot. This is very early days. This is 1995. The fellow had been shot in the right side of the chest, so enough to put the body into shock, but not enough to damage the heart, and also not enough to kill him. And as it took Enver years to say this, but he said, this man could have lived. I could have saved him. It wasn't lethal. But then I took his organs out because they told me to take his kidneys and his liver. And I took his kidneys and his liver and I sewed him back up. And then he died. The whole time he was alive, the blood was pulsing. How do you outdo a story like that? I mean, he did it. He knew it. He didn't know if this man was he thinks the man was not an ordinary convict because he didn't have a hair like mine. He had, longer hair. But he doesn't really know. It was possibly a political case. We don't know. But that was very early days. And he was told by his chief surgeon the next day, he said, "So what happened yesterday?" "Nothing happened. Isn't that right?" "It was an ordinary day, wasn't it?" And he said, "Yeah, it was an ordinary day." And he actually claims he did not talk about it till that day in Parliament when he stood up and started talking about this. So that was a great act. He thought he didn't know anything about, he was new in the country. He's an immigrant to UK. And he said, "I didn't know that there was such thing as statute of limitations or anything like that. I really thought that night they would come for me." And they didn't, of course. And we became very good friends over time, and we've driven all over the world together and so forth. But I think it's one of those stories which, how do you refute that? It's very simple. They do live organ harvesting. They do use Falun Gong. We have no questions on this. The evidence, anybody can read the huge reports that have come out. I've got one sitting over here. China Tribunal. I'm not going to write this. I'm writing a new book. It's called The Xinjiang Procedure. It's going to be full of all kinds of crazy adventures. But this is the textbook. You want to read it? The China Tribunal Judgment. It'll take you a week,
Ethan, you have documented how in China there's literally, I mean, we could call it a city. There's literally a city dedicated to this. So they have the killing machine over here. They have where they throw the bodies over here. They have the gulag where they have the prisoners over here. They actually have an entire orchestra of a killing machine, and everything is set up, right?
Yes, they do. And I think I can even possibly show you a photo of the Aksu compound. If nothing else, I can sort of describe it while I'm kind of looking for a photo here. What it is, and this was discovered by Gulchera Hoja, who's a very, very brave reporter at Radio Free Asia. Her whole family is in prison or in the camps because of what she does. But it has not stopped her from doing it. And I just think that's amazing. Okay. So having said that, these are the people who really pay the price for this kind of thing. Now, what happened is there's a hospital there. It's called the Aksu Infection Hospital. I know a bit about this hospital because I've interviewed people on it. It was a hospital for SARS. Remember SARS? Yeah, so SARS was the big disease in the old days in China. It became a hospital for religious dissidents, okay? And then it became an organ harvesting hospital, the Aksu Infection Hospital. They built a camp for 33,000 people around this hospital. Less than a kilometer away is another camp for 16,000 people. To the north of the camp, less than a kilometer away, is a crematorium. It is the largest crematorium I have ever seen on Google Earth. And I've looked at a bunch of them to sort of get a sense of scale. It's absolutely enormous. It appears it's what we call an afterburner system, where you've got several layers of burning so you can dispose of a lot of bodies very quickly. I've interviewed people who've driven up and down that road where the crematorium is located. And they all complained about the smell without me bringing it up. It's a smell, they said it's hard to describe. It's a smell of bone, like a burnt bone, like a bad barbecue of some kind. This is common. This is 20 minutes away from an airport, the Aksu International Airport. That airport has a green lane. What is a specific lane for organs, for human organs? It's written right there in Chinese and in English. This lane, is for a fast lane for human organs. It's for export, not for import, export only. And that is where they take the organs and they fly them on the fast plane to Shanghai or to Tianjin or to Beijing, to the top hospitals where the organ tourists from fancy countries come. So Japan.
Ethan, I wish I could let you expand on all of these things, and I wish I would not interrupt. Just our time is running out. Just want to touch on some things here. I have a difficult time concealing my anger in terms of the left, and knowing and growing up my whole life knowing about the Gulag Archipelago, knowing about the Maoist Cultural Revolution, knowing about what Castro did, and what the Castros continue to do, knowing about what you're talking about, and at the same time watching the brave journalists on CNN, Anderson Cooper, Don Lemon. I don't know whether we should hold our breath for them to be interested in something like this, but they're really concerned about human rights. I don't know when Rachel Maddow or MSNBC will invite you. The ladies on The View that are so concerned about human rights. How many times did you turn down an invitation from them? Because I haven't seen you on The View. So we've got this leftist media, which is just disgusting. They don't care about people. They don't care about human rights. Also, I'll add to that, the people in the West who are shaking hands with the Communist Party of China while this is going on. They are shaking hands with the hands that are going into the bodies of human beings and taking out their livers and kidneys while those people are alive. Just tell us a little bit about what you think about this in terms of the leftist disgusting silence, its shamelessness, its shamefulness, and also how the West is shaking hands with these monsters.
I think I'd separate it out a little bit. I'd nuance it a touch, and I'll tell you why. For obviously, look, I care about this issue, and I want to see, and I know that there have been activists from all sides who've helped out within this issue. But you're right when you say that the main impediment has been, it's not so much the left. How would you describe it? Come on, give me the language for this stuff. It's this inability to ever condemn another culture. Okay? This idea that, well, China has perhaps its own values. It's like that isn't a question of values here, okay? This isn't a question, this is a straightforward, this is murder, okay? This isn't sort of like, well, murder is part of their culture and the Aztecs. No, okay? This is nonsense. And there's a lot of that coming from the kind of very sloppy left, in a sense. The sort of in a way, it's very mainstream. These doctors who believe, well, we just have to all get along. And, the Chinese, the best way to change things is not through vinegar, but through a little bit of sugar. And we need to learn about China. They need to learn about us, and and then everything will be fine. It's like, no, it's not going to be fine. Jamie, you know what happened when the Soviet psychiatric institutions, right? I mean, I did, because my parents were psychologists and psychiatrists. And I remember my dad was very interested in ESP. This is during the 1960s. And I said, hey, Dad, apparently they know a lot about ESP over in the Soviet Union. Why don't you talk to those psychiatrists? And he said, I can't, and I won't. And I said, why is that? And he said, because they take people who disagree with the government and they put them in mental institutions and they torture them. Okay, now look, the West was not perfect back then. There were all kinds of disagreements over Vietnam and this and that. But the point was the World Psychiatric Association throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s and 80s and 90s, stood up every year and denounced the Soviet psychiatrists. And the way we denounced them, it meant we can have no contact with them. We should be having zero contact with the Chinese transplant industry, because that's what it is. I don't care if it's the nurses. I don't care if they're the most innocent people in the operating room. They shouldn't be coming over and studying here. They shouldn't be going to our conferences. They shouldn't be writing in our medical journals. And they certainly shouldn't be trying to teach anybody anything. And they certainly shouldn't be over there in a conference with the Vatican. Okay? This is totally out of line. We know more about the Chinese transplant hospitals than we ever knew about the Soviet psychiatric hospitals. That's the joke of it. But China's got a lot more money than the Soviet Union ever did. And so, yes, in that sense, that is truly the corruption that is given full reign in the left, because there's so much virtue signaling. There's so much, oh, we're on the right side. We're the reasonable ones. And meanwhile, there's this money trail. Okay. Meanwhile, there's this gravy train. Okay. And that's my problem. Because there is true. There is no money on my side. Okay. This red chair. Okay. Look, I don't want to give you a close up of the bottom of it, but it really needs a little restuffing on the bottom here. Okay. All right. It's a nice old chair. The money isn't here. The money's over there. They're correct about that.
Yeah. Well, Ethan, well, absolutely. Well, look, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, because the left in the United States, organ harvesting in China, they've got real enemies to deal with in America, like those parents that don't want the trannies gyrating in front of their kids. Those parents are the real enemies of humanity. We've got to wrap up here, Ethan. For those people who are on the edge of their seat right now with righteous indignation, who care, who want to maybe contribute and make a change, and each of us can make a change and maybe can influence something. How can they get in touch with you? What can they do? Is there an organization they can support? We don't want to just be inactive and silent. What can people do?
There is two groups that I think are out there, at least two or three, but one of them is the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. It's based out of Sydney, but it covers everybody. Okay, it covers the whole West. And so the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, ETAC is what we call it for short, is right out there on the web, and you can contact Susie Hughes there if you want to do anything. And the other place is, there are two experts on this, me and Matthew Robertson, and we're both at Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation in Washington, D.C. Okay. And I really believe we're doing great work on this issue. I've got to admit, we're the proud, the few, the brave, whatever, but we're doing that kind of work, and we'd appreciate anybody's involvement with us at all, even just intellectually. It's fine. Somebody wants to just send some well wishes, that's absolutely fine too. Okay, so it's very easy to find Victims of Communism Foundation in Washington, D.C. I don't have, it's a voc.com or something like that. Okay, sorry, I don't know it offhand, but I'm not always looking for it. I just want to thank you for, this has been very relaxing, and I appreciate your sincerity on the issue. It is a tough issue. It's not the toughest we've ever seen in history, but as I say, look, every generation will be faced with these kinds of challenges, every generation. And we have no choice but to participate wholeheartedly when we find these things.
Yeah, thank you, Ethan, so much. Just one more time, the website and the organization is Victims of Communism?
Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, that's where I hang my shingle.
Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation.
That is correct.
Okay.
And the other is ETAC, which is International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. And between these two, we'll find some way to work with you. So.
Yeah. Ethan, thank you so much for being a brave and noble truth teller. And just with so many cowards in this world and so much silence on these issues, the Glazov Gang is very grateful to you for shining a light into this darkness, because that darkness is slowly coming over here, and that'll be part 2 of our discussion. I hope you'll be back soon, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. I'd absolutely love to come back. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Ethan Gutmann. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan Gutmann, get his book, The Slaughter. And we'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I recently got one of Mike Lindell's pillows and comforters at mybillow.com. And I started getting some of the most restful sleeps in my life. And you can do the same. Go to mypillow.com and use code GG21 to get incredible and amazing discounts. Or just call 1-800-854-0673. While you're doing that, you'll know that you're supporting Mike Lindell, a true American hero fighting a true American cause. And you'll also be supporting the Glazov Gang. Thank you. May God bless you, and may God bless America.